I now call to order the regular scheduled meeting for the Board of Zoning Appeals. Notice to the public, the time, the date, the place, and the agenda of this meeting was provided as a legal notice on November the 5th, 2019 in the Aiken Standard. Notice to contiguous property owners was sent, and signs posted on the properties were sent on or before November the 6th, 2019. Notices were sent to for posting on the city webpage, to the city clerk, and to the Finance and Administration Building Notice Board and the Municipal Building Notice Board to be placed at least 24 hours before this meeting. Agenda sheets were mailed or emailed to interested parties. As a reminder, it is unlawful for any person giving testimony to this board knowingly providing false information that's according to Section 22-9 of the Aiken Municipal Code. Each infraction is a separate offense with a penalty of up to 30 days in jail and or a fine of $1,092.50. To persons that wish to address the board, we ask that you occupy the podium in front of us. Please speak clearly so that your speech can be picked up by the system. And if you wish copies of today's presentations, we ask that you sign up on the sign-up sheet just beyond the double doors, or you may call the planning department. Please state your name and your address. To the board, you have received copies of the minutes from the October 22nd, 2019 regular meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes?
Mr. Chair, I move the minutes of the October 22nd, 2019 meeting be accepted as written.
But would you hold that just a second, because I had one comment.
Okay.
I thought on the second page when you talked about a previous request had been heard by the zoning board, and you just state in the narrative, you just state a previous request. Would it be okay if we list the Leslie B. Price Community Center as the location for that previous request, even though it's picked up on the board member Duke's comments? She talked about the Price Center. Okay, Bud, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. That was on the second page. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
On the second page, second paragraph, I would like for Leslie B. Price Center to be named as the previous center that we heard a request.
All right, sir, I'll make amend the motion then that minutes be accepted with the amendment so stated.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Nancy, so second the motion. You've heard the motion, the amended motion. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion, the amended motion, raise the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. John?
I was absent.
John abstaining, he was absent. The motion is carried 6-0. We have final orders, Mary. We will move directly into new business. I call your attention to application 20-90001, a petition for an administrative appeal for setback of an accessory building, and that's at 704 Hayne Avenue Southwest, to the city. Has this been properly posted?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the signs were not posted on the property as there is no posting requirement for administrative appeals, but a notice was provided to all contiguous property owners and all meeting agenda notice requirements were satisfied. So all notice requirements were satisfied.
What she's explaining is that in the opening, I stated that signs were posted on all properties on the agenda, but she's explaining that for an administrative appeal, it is not required that a sign be posted. However, the neighbors were notified of the appeal. So if a sign is not posted on the property for the administrative appeal, that is not a requirement for an administrative appeal. But all other matters coming before this board, there are signs required to be posted prior to the board meeting. That way it does not negate what my statement in the opening section, which states that after the legal notice in the paper, that we post signs on the properties and that contiguous property owners are notified of the meeting and the agenda.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do you have an opening statement for us?
Yes, please note, board, and let the minutes reflect that we did receive additional information, which was provided at your seats. We will submit that to the record as Exhibit E. We received a series of emails from the adjacent property owner and adjacent property owners, so those are included as Exhibit E for your review. So you are considering tonight an appeal of an administrative denial for a setback reduction for placement of a storage shed. And just to give some background, on September 16th, 2019, staff responded to a concern from a neighbor regarding the placement of this storage shed along a fence between the subject property and the complainant's property. Staff visited the site and found that, yes, the shed did appear to be in violation of the minimum setback requirement, which is outlined in section 3.4.2C of the zoning ordinance. States that any accessory building totally detached from the principal building shall be set back not less than 10 feet from the side or rear lot line. So, finding this, staff notified the property owner of the violation and presented options for a variance or an administrative appeal pursuant to section 3.4.2H of the zoning ordinance, which allows for the possibility of an administrative waiver of setbacks by the planning director if the applicant can demonstrate that there is no other reasonable place for the building that would meet the required setbacks and can justify the request based on one or more reasons, and we've included those in your staff report at the top of the second page. So on September 18th this year, the applicant filed an administrative waiver application and they cited the narrow nature of that section of the subject property, as well as their planned future use for that area to house bees. On September 20th, pursuant to section 3.4.2H, staff posted the property and mailed notice to directly contiguous property owners, letting them know about this administrative waiver that had been requested. And then on October 7th of 2019, which was the final day for comments to be submitted, staff received an objection from one of the contiguous property owners citing encroachment on personal privacy and enjoyment of property and fire concerns due to the proximity to the wooden fence and pre-existing structures at that neighboring property, 135 Lancaster. So the planning director considered these comments received and denied the waiver primarily on two factors. One was that concern for fire safety, given that storage sheds may be used to store flammable materials, and that the complainant has a wood-framed carport that is both close to the property line and the shed's location. And then a second concern was that the applicant's stated intent of housing bees in or near the shed might could possibly infringe on the enjoyable use of the property for the neighbor who submitted the complaint. So the applicant was notified of the denial of administrative waiver and then filed an appeal the next day.
This storage shed, was it constructed or purchased, or which?
I believe it's a prefabricated shed. It was not a stick-built shed.
Questions from the board to the city?
Oh, yes, I have one.
Brandon?
The administrative appeal was denied. I believe the first factor was the safety issue. Fire.
Correct.
In reference to the Barranco attachment, is he speaking for the fire aspect of that as well or not?
Yes, good question. So as a part of the administrative appeal process, staff must share the request and the nature of the request, any relevant details with the fire marshal, with public safety, and with the engineering and utilities department. And they did neither raised any concerns.
Yeah, that was cited as a reason for one of the,
But the planning director, in hearing the concern of the neighbor, found that was, he did entertain the concern of
okay,
the neighbor.
thank you.
Other questions from the board to the city? Karen?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify, the complaint or concern from a neighbor was referenced as 704 Colleton Avenue. Is that a typo, or did the person that originally brought it to the city's attention live that far from the subject property?
That is a typo, should be neighbor of 704 Hayne Avenue Southwest, I believe would be the author's intent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John?
Seeing that this is an appeal, clarify what we need, what you expect from us in the end,
Right. So
as outlined at the bottom of page 2.
yes, sir. So you as the board have three options at this point. You may affirm the finding of the planning director, which would result in the upholding of the denial of the requested administrative waiver. Or you may modify the action of the planning director. So you may apply some conditions and then ultimately vote to grant the administrative waiver with whatever conditions you apply. Or you may all out reverse the denial and issue the waiver. It's referenced here as permit, but issue the administrative waiver with no conditions, just as requested.
Bees, that's not a zoning issue.
Yes, there is nothing.
We shouldn't even consider that.
Well, there is nothing that explicitly that prohibits the keeping of bees in the zoning ordinance. However, some of your irrelevant consideration would be the enjoyment of property by neighboring property owners. So while bees are not prohibited, you may choose to take into consideration the neighbor's concern. But understand that, and this was the guidance that we gave when a neighbor inquired about whether or not bees are allowed. So no, there's no explicit prohibition against beekeeping in the city, but we do have a nuisance ordinance. So if said bees began to truly infringe on a property owner's ability to enjoy their property by the criteria given in the nuisance ordinance, then they could lodge a complaint, and that could be investigated, and the beekeepers would be subject to that nuisance clause in the zoning ordinance or city code.
I would assume that the burden of proof would lie with the complainant.
Yeah, that would be a series of conversations between the complainant and the enforcing officer.
But we're hearing an issue about the placement of the shed, not the existence of a beehive.
Right, you're considering whether or not to, ultimately to allow a reduction in setbacks for this shed. The planning director cites in his memo the specific use, the intended use for that shed, but it's up to you, board, to what you do with that information.
Mr. Chairman, that may raise another question that could
Sure.
relate. Are the beehives considered a shed?
No, those would not be a structure regulated subject to any of these accessory building setback requirements. It has to be a roofed structure. Those are, no, we would not consider beehives subject to any setback requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like
Nancy?
to understand, because this new thing that just came out, how far is this shed from the applicant's property line?
So there is some apparent dispute. Obviously, the submitter of this additional information cites some measurements. We noticed the property, and this is using GIS data, or Geographic Information Systems mapping data, county aerial mapping, and conversations with the applicant, the administrative waiver applicant, the owner of 704 Hayne Avenue, that the shed was approximately a foot off of the property line. Our zoning official found that the fence is not on the property line. So the original administrative waiver application, actually, the language used was 6 to 8 inches, a request to have the shed be 6 to 8 inches off of the fence line. Well, fence line is not synonymous with property line, so we gave a few more inches off of the property line and said approximately a foot off of the property line. That's staff's observation. There's some dispute now, apparently, from the neighbor.
Was the applicant notified about the property line? The location of the property line, that it was not, the drawings were not correct, that they have been referring to?
Could you clarify the question?
In this case, when you say that the pole is not on the property line, that it's
Right,
encroaching
yes.
in the neighbor's property, was the
Yes.
applicant notified?
That the fence was not on the property line. Yes, when I sent out the notice to contiguous property owners, did the signs, did all of the required posting for the administrative waiver, that 1 foot phrase was based on a conversation that I had following up when I saw that 6 to 8 inches was referencing a fence and not a property line. I followed up with the property owner to verify that was how far we actually were off of the property line. And she clarified that the property line was not the same as the fence line, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Another question in my mind, are we depending on the measurements taken by the city, or are we going on actual measurements taken by a design, architectural firm that looks at properties and
So,
determine property lines?
yeah, you have now a number of measurements to consider and discern. We've provided our finding, what we found, absent a recent survey. At the time, we did not have a survey, to go out with, at the time all of this was authored. The neighboring property owner has submitted here today, and I think over the last day or two, some additional plats for your consideration. But as to what you use and what,
And the planning director is making a decision. Was this decision based on the accuracy of one of the official property descriptions?
right, the planning director's understanding of the setback from where the shed was placed from the property line was based, like I said, on the aerial mapping software we have. There are some measurement tools on the county's mapping software and on our city geographic information system software, field observation by the zoning official, and conversations with the property owner.
John?
I hate to keep this property line issue alive, and I'd just like, for my own clarification, in the second paragraph, last sentence, you said that staff found that the fence did not constitute a property line. I understand that, and was located approximately 4 feet on the subject property at the location of the shed. So was that found to be 4 feet inside the Callahan's property or 4 feet inside the Wyatt property?
I would assume that the author intended that to mean in subject property, he meant the Callahan's property. That is the subject property.
So if that were the case, the shed is 4 feet on the Wyatt property, yes?
Yep,
That's how I understand it. If the property line was 4 feet inside the Callahan property, then that puts the shed 4 feet outside of the property line.
Makes it 4 feet further away from the property line, which is more into their favor.
Okay.
But the dispute now is that
Exactly, but I was reading that and it's very confusing.
that does, and that conflicts with all of the other citations that it's 1 foot off the property line. So
Okay.
I honestly don't know where,
I just want to make sure that, so we should disregard that 4 feet, that's a typo,
or we can continue the matter and I can seek clarification from
Okay.
the planning director, because that is, if that's accurate, if that was his finding, that's obviously very different from 1 foot. The 1 foot that was cited earlier in the administrative waiver process.
Other questions from the board to the city?
Yes, okay. Let
Nancy?
me understand this, okay? Or try and understand it. No one came ahead of time to find out how far ahead, where to put the shed. Correct. The shed was built, and then somebody contacted the
Yes.
planning director, okay? So wherever the property line is, you know, whether it's one of the 3 places, are any of those definitions within the setback that it's supposed to be?
Yeah, whether it's 1 foot or 4 feet or some inches off of the property line, in all cases, it does not meet the required setback of 10 feet off of the
Okay.
property line. Good question, yes.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. And I wasn't sure if this was saying it was making it within the required setback, so it does not.
Right.
Okay.
Do we have additional questions to the city? Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
all I can
go
say
ahead, go
is,
ahead.
from the appearance, driving by, looking where the prefab shed is, which appears to be up against the fence. I didn't get out and measure or anything like that. We're not sure whether the fence is on the property line or not. But right now, the only physical restriction from moving the shed even closer to the fence, to the property line, is the fence. Is that right? That the property line is beyond the fence. The fence doesn't depict the property line.
Right.
Okay.
You're
So
correct.
the question is, where is the property line? And
Yes, that's
where, we're
disputed.
going to measure from that. But regardless of that, it looks like, as my colleague just mentioned, it doesn't matter. 10 feet,
It's definitely not 10
It's
feet
not
off of
10 feet.
the property line.
okay? So regardless of where the property line, it's not 10 feet.
Correct.
All here is clear. Thank you. Ms. Callahan, is she, would you please? Would you identify yourself for the
Lara
minute?
Callahan, also known as Tink Callahan, 704 Hayne Avenue Southwest, right downtown in the historical district.
Ms. Callahan, you received copies of the staff report. Do you wish to embellish on the staff report or
I
to and
think-
from questions from the board?
I think the confusion, I think that 4 feet is a typo. I think it's 4 inches. Because I think the fence is actually, I thought it was more like 4 to 6 inches, but if they say it's 4 inches, it's 4 inches onto our property. So our property goes a little behind the fence when it was first put up years and years ago. The fence is also 8 feet high, which was grandfathered at the time. And if you know anything about bees, they recommend that if you have at least a 6-foot fence, and definitely if you have an 8-foot fence, the bees don't bother your neighbors. They go up overhead, and in my case, they come out what I call the bee alley. They go out the bee alley either to to Chaffee, or they go toward my house where I have 3 water sources for them, and I'm in the process of planting a lot of bee and butterfly bushes that for their enjoyment and pollination. The shed was not put up before I did all this. I was in close contact with Ms. Lawton regarding our carport. And I've been very successful with having an administrative waiver several times in the past because the property, the way it's laid out, it's difficult to position things so that it looks lovely from both Lancaster and from Hayne. We get a lot of traffic coming down Hayne and down Lancaster, and appreciating the fact that we have a historical property that we are keeping in pristine condition. So when I wanted to put this bee shed, not she shed, up, I was already working with the planning board, and I said, oh, by the way, do I need, and she said, absolutely, you've got to have an administrative waiver. Well, an administrative waiver is not a difficult thing, particularly when I'm working so well with the planning board, and they are understanding where I'm coming from trying to position things on the property. And I didn't think it was going to be an issue at all until they received a letter from a neighbor. So I think that, it's all in here. I think that the bee shed is nice where it is. I don't think it bothers anybody. I think that the whole alley, the B alley that I've put together is going to be enhanced in the neighborhood. I've cleared the property to a great expense and a lot of sweat equity. The B shed is completely movable. If I could move it anywhere else on the property, I absolutely would. I certainly don't want a disgruntled neighbor. However, this alley is only 23 feet wide. So the shed, being 4 by 8, it's a very small shed, can't even be positioned sideways without needing administrative waiver from one side to the other. Now, I guess I could put it on the other side, on Sharon Brown's side, but I'd still need an administrative waiver. I need an administrative waiver wherever I put it in the alley. And I don't have any flammables in it. I don't have anything that's fire, that would cause a fire. I'm very mindful of the equipment I keep in there, and it's just very simple B equipment. It's, you know, there was, you know, there's just, it's just a straightforward thing, and I think the whole alley itself has been, it's been a project. We've spent a lot of time and money making that area beautiful. We get a lot of people walking by while I was working on it, dog walkers and neighbors that said how gorgeous it is and how pretty it is and how we've improved that part of the Chaffee. And even Sharon Brown's son came by and said, wow, this is looking great. And he said, well, don't give me any ideas. I said, I'm giving you some ideas, you know. So I'd love to see that whole corner just really continue to look nice. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes. When I look at the Exhibit A, the shed is up against the fence. Why does it have to be up against the fence?
Well, I'm trying to keep it far enough from the beehives that I'm not on the beehives when I'm putting away my gear, when I'm taking off my gear, when I'm putting on my gear. And having it right there provides at least, I would say, 12 to 15 feet of space for me not to be on top of the hives to, you know, put my equipment away.
I'm not into beekeeping, but I'm lost.
Well, I invite you to come over and see. I mean, it's, and really with the 8-foot fence there, I think you can see from the picture, you are looking at a peak that's not much wider than this, because the peak that is above the 8-foot fence is not much wider than this, and it really only goes to about this high. It's maybe, I think maybe 18 inches. I'd be surprised if it's 2 feet. It's like this and 18 inches. That's all you see from the neighbors. And then I took pictures of my neighbors. I mean, I look at their roofs, I look at their house roof, I look at their shed roof, I look at all these things, and those are not 10, some of them are not 10 feet from the property line. But, you know, downtown is like that. You know, there's, you know, you live with your neighbors and what they're doing, and hopefully it's all working out.
Mr. Chairman,
Nancy,
ask a question?
please.
I'm confused because you said you were working with the planning director on all of this, and it wasn't a big deal to get the waiver. You did not have a waiver in place, or you did? Did you, or did you not?
I did have a waiver
For the
in place
shed?
for my carport. I had a waiver of 2 to 4 feet for the carport. My carport.
So you just
which is-
assumed you could do this?
Of course.
Okay.
And then when I was talking to Ms. Lawton about the carport, she said, oh, you need another waiver. I went, oh my gosh, okay. So then I applied for it, and I didn't think it would be a problem at all. In fact, my carport, I was able, when I had the waiver, I think it was 2 to 4 feet.
Yeah, that conversation was actually, we did speak about the administrative waiver, but that was initiated after I received an email from, a concerned email from the neighbor saying, hey, over the weekend, this thing has gone up, and then I followed up and we determined that a waiver would be required and a certificate of appropriateness would be required, but we can't get to that until we clear up the pending zoning violation.
So you didn't even apply for a waiver for the shed, or you did?
Not until I was told that I needed one for that, because I had already gotten one for my carport. And my carport could have been, my carport, which is, our carport, which is 24 by 16, where it was allowed, and you can see the carport in some of the pictures here, the carport was allowed 2 to 4 feet away from the property line. So I said, oh, nobody's going to care about this little 4 by 8 movable shed.
Okay, thank you.
But
Okay, I drove by and I saw where your 4x8 shed is. Are you saying that this B alley is that area where the shed is? In other words, their flight pattern is down through that alley? Where are the beehives located?
There's only one right now, and the beehive is closer to my carport, a couple feet off the fence line on Sharon Brown's side.
Okay, so their flight path, wherever they're coming from, is down through the alley into that beehive.
Well, it's down toward my house, toward Hayne. That's their
Okay.
flight, they're facing toward Hayne,
Okay.
so they're not even facing the neighbor at all.
Mr.
Well, I
Chairman?
guess where I'm.
Sorry, just
Go
for the
ahead.
board's reference, Sharon Brown, the Sharon Brown sign she's referring to is the western property line, if you're looking at this aerial map.
okay.
So I've kind of got an idea where the hive is, and I know where the shed is now. As big a lot as that is, and I saw your carport in the distance as I drove by, but there's absolutely no other location for that 4x8 shed on this
Good
lot?
question. David and I have been very, very mindful of trying to keep this property looking true to its historical nature. This type of shed probably would not have been around in 1900 when the house was built. It really needs to be in proximity to the bees. Can I put it, in the front yard? Probably, but who wants to see that shed in the front yard? Where in the bee alley, in my bee alley, I'm growing Confederate jasmine on that wire fence. You were able to see through the wire fence, right? Well, I'm growing Confederate jasmine on the wire fence, and I showed pictures of how Confederate jasmine grows. It can take over, and it will cause a green screen. So not only won't you see in from Chaffee, the bees are liable, if they do go in that direction, which I don't think they will, but if they did go in that direction, they would go over the green wall, the green Confederate jasmine. You can't control where bees go, right? But I don't think there's a danger to either neighbor on either side of this bee alley, and that shed is a perfect location. I don't think we would want to look at it down on Lancaster. I mean, I don't think we'd want to look at it in the front yard on Hayne.
Well, I guess what I'm going is, you mentioned screening, you mentioned with the jasmine vine and so forth, and I guess I'm just trying to get in my mind, and I've known that property for a long time, but I just find it hard to get in my mind or get my arms around the fact that a small shed like this can't be located such that it doesn't offend your neighbor or meets the requirements elsewhere. Not putting it in front of your house in Hayne Avenue, I hear you on that, but another location within the lot, properly screened or screened as you wish, but yet meet the requirements of setbacks and so forth, and not conflict with anything that you're trying to do with the bees.
I mean, I've tried to figure out where that would be. I can't see where it would be.
Better question. Ms. Callahan, in terms of looking, first of all, I applaud your effort on bees. Very few people understand the crisis that bees are in and their critical roles as pollinators. I do a lot with agricultural customers and stuff, and you're to be commended on trying to propagate bees and create environments for them. In terms of where to position it within your bee alley, you gave me the measurement of 23 feet across, and of course it's probably 23 feet plus, given the fence is, whether it's 1 inch, 4 inches, 6 inches, or whatever, probably infringing on your own property line. The shed's 4 feet, correct?
4
Thick.
feet deep and 8 feet wide.
Right, so, but turned on its side and centered in your bee alley, you're within fractions of being 10 feet to both sides. What would keep you from floating that little bee hut in the center of that alley?
I was thinking about that, but I would probably have to close the gate on Chaffee permanently and put the beehive there somewhere. But if it's in the very middle, it's not very far from the beehives, you know. And then the doors to the bee shed, if you look, are it's not like a long narrow where you can go in the side door and you're walking 8 feet deep. You walk in the bee shed rather, and it's 8 feet wide, and there's a double door if you look at the pictures. So floating it in the middle is like, well, I probably would have to throw away that shed and just come up with something else, because the shed, it doesn't make any sense visually, and the alley wouldn't even be pretty with it floated in the middle. I mean, right now I have room to plant all along the sides. I have room for a cute little fountain. I have room to plant, you know, I've got I'm planting trees on the sides, flowering trees, and some hydrangeas that attract butterflies. So all of that is part of the design scheme, and I've been a landscape designer on and off for years.
Yeah, no, everything I saw in there, it clearly looks like you're doing stuff in a first-class way. I'm just trying to mitigate the concern of a neighbor who's within its rights. You would be out of variance. And unfortunately, the board here has to take opposition to such by an adjacent neighbor seriously to allow a waiver, and for you to cite that there's absolutely no other place on that property that it could work. I understand it may not be position A or the most aesthetically beautiful, but I'm trying to figure out a way to help you keep the shed.
Well, why don't you come over and take a look?
Well, I did come over and take a look.
And walk the property and help me find another place if
Well,
that's the case.
Given you wanted it in proximity of the bees where your
Right.
hive is now, which I saw.
Yeah.
There is a way to position that. You'd be floating it in the middle.
Well, can I?
I mean, we would
can I
probably be
provide-
looking at a
can I
waiver
provide-
of a matter of a few inches at that
Can I
point.
provide a green screen behind it, like if I put some trellis behind it so he doesn't look at the roof, and I can grow some more jasmine on it or something? I mean, what is the real problem? It's
Well, I'm
behind an
assuming
eight-foot-
the other
fence.
side
Yeah.
is here, and then we'll get the
No,
chance
it's
to
behind
ask.
an
But
8-foot
I was just asking you at this point.
Well, I would prefer not to have to move it.
Okay.
I mean, that would cause a lot of issues
Okay.
and quite a bit of money to move all that with the platform and stuff, although it could be done.
Okay. Thank you.
No, there is a possibility you could move that shed behind your carport now, and that is absolutely gorgeous. And all of that, I walked on your property, I walked all back there today, it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
But, like I say, when you have a neighbor who's offended by the proximity of that, and who looks out of, I went all behind his house, who looks out of his window and sees that right there, I can see how that would be offensive. So could you not move it behind the the carport or even on the Sharon Brown side of your house, but close to your house?
Would I still need an administrative waiver
Not
for it
if
to
you
be
put
over
it
there?
on your house. I'm not talking about Sharon Brown's, I'm saying on
On her
that side.
fence?
But no, not at her fence, but at your house. You wouldn't have to have a waiver for that.
10-foot setback is what she's saying, right?
Yeah.
Where
but
would
you
I put it?
You would put it beside your house. On the Sharon Brown side, but not the fence side, but move it to your side of your house.
And cover up the historical windows
Well, I
there.
think there's some probably boards in there that you could put it in front of.
Because that side of the house is really historically beautiful, because it's got that bay window that comes out, and it's got the stained glass windows. I don't think there's a piece of that house that you want to put anything in front of. I've been pretty careful about that.
Well, like I say, that, you
Yeah,
know,
I
that
mean,
is an option.
I'm trying to understand where we're,
Yeah, I did not go to that side of your house. I've been in the yard before, but I've forgotten. But you're saying that every inch along that way is covered by windows and everything? There's not a
it is covered
whatever.
by windows.
Okay.
It's covered by windows.
Well,
I at
maybe
one
they-
time had permission to put a gazebo on Sharon Brown's, I think it's in the file. I had permission to put a gazebo on Sharon Brown's side of the fence. Maybe I can segue that into the bee shed, to put it on the fence line on Sharon Brown's side.
Because her carport or whatever is real close there too, so.
Everything is close. Everything in that neighborhood is close.
I know.
I mean,
John?
I would like to make a suggestion as to the placement of the shed. And I am a certified beekeeper, certified by the state. And you have got your bees set up just right. I don't think anyone's going to realize any problems with the bees. Although I do think right behind the hive, near where the butterfly bench is, you could move the shed backing up against the fence, Sharon Brown's fence.
okay.
And could we grant that?
I said
Okay.
we can't because it would need to be advertised again.
No, but this is,
Unless it's 10 feet from Sharon's property line.
we can modify what the waiver, can we not, per these directions at the bottom of page 2?
I would think to satisfy, that's kind of some gray area, but to err on the side of caution, I would think to satisfy notice requirements, when you talk about assigning conditions or modifying the request, I would think you would still want it in the same location that has been requested, but you could allow a lesser, or a lesser setback than what was requested. But to suggest that it might be moved to another part of the property, it would probably,
Even though it's directly across, opposite where it is now, 20 feet away?
If it's outside of the 10-foot line.
But I think you'd have to notify Sharon Brown to
And have-
request it from.
Exactly, but, and again, I'm kind of confused because of our directions here at the bottom of page 2. Do we have the authority to reverse or modify the waiver that was denied? Can we say, okay, you can do that if you put it here?
If you put it here on your property but not infringing on the neighbors that have protested.
No,
And we
no,
can't
right.
do it, but we cannot do it to the other property owner without them
I'm talking
knowing.
about going against the western
right,
wall.
I would say, absent legal counsel here, to advise one way or the other, because we've noticed this from the inception of the administrative waiver, we've always been referencing this one particular property line. To introduce another property line might be, might take us down we might not want to go that route.
Right.
I'm just thinking of it as if I lived in property C, and they were trying to put it too close to property A, and I'm property B, and I don't know anything about this, and all of a sudden a shed comes closer to my property than what I know I'm entitled to, that wouldn't.
I understand that.
Okay.
But along that western border, there's a lot of trees and shrubs and bushes that would block that shed from the view of Sharon Brown.
Mr. Chairman,
I think
if I could, I would recommend that if you wish to pursue that perhaps you table this agenda item and we can seek legal counsel and determine whether or not we would need to go through the notice process again.
Okay.
I hear your suggestion, but I think that we ought to act, we have three options. And rather than us try to become experts, beekeepers, housing, and the like, I think we should get back to our agenda and then exercise one of the three options that we have. And we want to thank Ms. Callahan for her presentation. We want to hear from the others so that we can make an appropriate decision based on the three options that we do have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have others to speak to the administrative decision?
Good evening. My name is Hampton Wade. I live at 135 Lancaster Street Southwest. My wife and I own that property. And we were the ones that made the initial inquiry about the variance on if there was some sort of variance required for a shed. I wasn't familiar with there was or wasn't. I just inquired and they went out and said, yes, there's a problem. And we weren't, and that reason, of course, we did ask that question because we weren't pleased. And it's the reason we're here tonight. Basically, I just had a handful of points, and maybe you'll have questions for me. But as far as the shed, I measured the distance from the shed to the eaves of my house, and it's 6.5 feet. I'm 6 feet, so I may be taller when my hair is combed back, but somewhere around in here is actually the distance between our house, the eaves of our house, and the shed. So I do think the property line that Ms. Callahan verified is basically approximately the fence is 4 inches off, not 4 feet. It was probably a mistake in that respect. So we're both thinking along the same lines. The property line's 4 inches approximately, the fence is 3 inches wide, and they have another, so basically the shed is about 1.5 feet off the property line. But it's only because our house is a historic house. It was built at the time when they didn't have the setbacks that we have today. It's very, very tight. So as per the plats that I submitted, at the widest, our carport actually is like 6.5 feet from the property line, and the front of the house is only 5 feet from the property line. So it's not a perfectly straight property. But anyway, as far as the points, as far as being able to put the shed somewhere else, I know the Callahans mentioned that the property is 23 feet wide. I actually have a survey. It is 23 feet wide at the narrowest, but it's 27 feet wide at the front on Chafee Lane. And I believe that actually where it is right now, if you split the difference because it's right in the middle, it would definitely be legal right in the center of the property. Whether, as far as taste, I can't speak to that. Whether it's, if the Callahans don't feel it's going to be as attractive as where it is now, that's not for me to say, because taste is not something we can discuss. But I do, based on the plat I have here, my own property, and that section of the property, it can be legal there. And also the property, Callahans have a beautiful house, and they do have a large property. I have no doubt there's somewhere else that the shed could be put, even on the other side of the carport there. So, and I'm not a beekeeper, but if I have a feeling it would be no problem. I believe It said in the paperwork that they had to prove that they could not place it elsewhere or not legally, and based on the plat I have, which you may have a copy of, if not, I'd be glad to pass this around, but it actually does show it's 27 at the widest and 24. You have a 10-foot setback, that's 20 feet, so, and the shed's not 7 feet wide, so it would definitely fit in the middle of the property. So, that's pretty much what I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions from the board to Mr. Wade?
I have
John?
one. Could we see, Paula, could we see the first and second photographs from this photograph? I'm sorry. I thought you were controlling the slides. Forgive me.
Is that correct?
Hampton, what we see on the left, on the photograph on the right, is the shed.
Correct.
And then the building on the other side of the fence is your carport.
Correct.
And is that in line with the back of your house?
Basically, yes.
So that's showing how close the proximity of that shed is to your home.
Correct.
Okay.
I knew it was close, and I was surprised when it popped up, and then I actually measured. I was like, wow, it's really, really close. I don't want to deny them having a shed. I just want it somewhere where it's not on top of us. So,
Any further questions?
Would this
John?
variance, and to the city, if I may, would this variance go with the property, or would it go with the owners?
So this is not actually a variance. This action that you're taking is an appeal
Okay.
of an administrative decision. So it's not formatted as your typical variance would with conditions that you can assign. But you can assign conditions. You can modify the finding of the planning director. So you could clarify that this is only to be granted for the current property owner, not to run in perpetuity with the property.
Okay.
And could we modify it to be in the middle, but they don't have to do that?
Right.
They could decide to tear the shed down and throw it away, or they could move it anywhere else as long as it's 10 feet from where the property line of where they move it to. This wouldn't tie them to having to put it in the middle of the B alley.
So, say the question one more time.
Okay, if we give them, if we modify the action of the planning director and pass it with the condition that the shed be moved to the middle of the B alley, they don't have to move it to the middle of the B alley if they find a better spot for it.
Certainly, yeah, if permission is
Okay, I
is
didn't want
granted.
anybody to think that if we made a motion for that, that they would have to do that.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, I disagree with you on giving them a recommendation where it should be. I think we ought to just either uphold or
Or deny,
deny.
no modification.
No modifications.
And
That's part of our discussion, so we're not there yet. We have additional questions from the board to Mr. Wade.
Mr. Chairman, I did have one
Karen?
question. I hear that the fire concerns and the bees were the two major concerns that you had. Just out of curiosity, if the shed were moved within eye line of the existing carport, where it almost looks to me it could be shifted down and not be in that sight line, would it be as much of an issue with the fire safety and other concerns still be the major proponent, or is it more of an aesthetic? Aside from the setback, just out of curiosity.
I think, well, I do think it's still a concern. I know that Tank said that there's, she doesn't keep any flammables or anything in the shed. I don't know what somebody else may do or what may happen in the future, which does concern me, being that close to the fence. And I also don't think it's necessary, just because I do think it can be legal in the middle of the area where it is now, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have others who speak to the appeal of the administrative waiver?
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to
Yes.
someone's suggestion, I believe Ms. Turner suggested moving it closer to the house, and the property owner expressed concern about whether or not that would be historically appropriate, just so that this board is fully aware. A part of the certificate of appropriateness review process is reviewing the proposed location of structures such as this to ensure that it meets the historic design and preservation guidelines. So they would, the board and staff would work with her to, if she weren't proposing a location that posed a zoning violation and met setback requirements, then we would work with her to make sure that that location was appropriate. So the board may find that placing it on that side, it sounds like Ms. Callahan has concerns, but we may be able to find a location that would be appropriate. I know that's not your purview, but understand there is a process that would capture historic appropriateness, and if that is a concern for you. And to elaborate on one of the planning directors, his concern with the storage of flammable materials, while the current property owner may not intend to use this shed to store anything that would be dangerous or flammable, future property owners might.
We're not at that point yet.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Wait until we get into discussion, please.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have, final call, do we have others to speak to the administrative appeal? Hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
I make a motion so that we
Nancy?
can get into a period of discussion to affirm the action of the planning director.
Second.
To deny.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second that we affirm the action of the planning director. Do we have any discussion? We're open for discussion. Your comment about flammable materials and the next owner, whether or not this.
Right, well, that was the planning director's concern. While this property owner may not use the building in that manner, a future property owner, if the shed were still there, might.
But approval of the administrative decision can't be restricted to this owner and not to go with the land.
Correct. But thinking that through, that might be when you're talking about approval for a structure, even though this is a relatively mobile structure compared to what you might typically see, it might be unpalatable to make a future property owner remove a structure that they purchase with the building. That might
That was
get,
your problem.
yes.
Yeah.
So that might get a little messy. And I just wanted you to be aware that denial of this location, if you uphold the planning director's finding and did not overturn his decision, which is essentially denying the administrative waiver, then the property owner would still be permitted to apply for a waiver for other locations on the property. So you're not permanently denying her having this shed and requesting a setback reduction.
Thank you for clarifying that, because that's what I wanted to make sure that they were able to do.
Okay, good.
Other board discussion?
What gives me heartburn,
John?
and it's the only issue here, for me, is the proximity to the house. even though nothing is going to be flammable is going to be stored in that shed, that doesn't prevent it from happening in the future. And the fire hazard, I think, is very profound, being that close to the house from me to the window there. It could very easily spread to the White's house. So that's at the crux. That's my main reservation for this. But it's a good-looking shed. Seriously, I think Tink's done a great job in fixing that up back there. She's going to love tending bees.
Well, Mr. Chair, I agree with my colleague John that just because it's being used for one thing now, it could be used for something else down the road or a new owner. But I also feel that there are other options available for the location of this 4x8 shed on that property. And so my vote would be to uphold or affirm the planning director's action on this, because there are other options. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I basically feel that we can affirm the planning director's decision, and that would allow the applicant to go back and apply for other options since she's heard comments from the public meeting. If we have no further discussions, those in favor of the motion show by raise of the right hand. Let it be shown unanimously that we affirm the decision of the planning director. I call your attention to application 293005. That's a petition requesting a variance to the zoning ordinance regarding the setback of an accessory building at 228 Lakeside Drive to the city. Has this been properly posted?
Yes, sir.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
Property is located in the Gem Lakes neighborhood. There is only one property abutting it at the rear. It's approximately half-acre lot, and it's noted in the staff report and by the applicant that it's a pie-shaped lot, if that, well, the map will illustrate that, but it's...
Mr. Chairman, I don't think she's answering the question you asked.
I'm sorry.
No, you're into the presentation first.
Oh, what did you say?
I asked if this had been properly posted.
Oh, I said yes, sir.
Okay.
And then have you had any inquiries?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you asked. Okay. No, this did not receive any inquiries or additional comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Nancy, for reminding me. Now you may do your presentation.
Okay. Located in Gem Lakes, only one rear neighbor, half-acre lot, pie-shaped, approximately 220 feet in depth. The lot has a wider front or west property line at approximately 155 feet, and then the rear or east property line is at approximately 65 feet long. For your background, in spring of 2017, the applicant filed for an administrative waiver for a setback reduction at the rear property line. and was denied because it was found that there was sufficient space to construct the approximately 25 by 30-foot accessory structure without setback waiver. So the applicant ultimately constructed an accessory structure that was approximately 13 feet from the rear property line in compliance with the ordinance. So the applicant now requests permission to construct a lean-to structure approximately 26 by 8 feet to the rear of the existing storage structure, and this would require a setback reduction of 5 feet, so that would be 5 feet off of the rear property line. This does qualify as a building by our zoning ordinance definition. A building is a roofed structure, and therefore subject to the accessory building setback requirements found in section 3.4.2.c.1. Setback required, any accessory building totally detached from the principal building shall be set back no less than 10 feet from the side or rear lot line.
Any questions to the city?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Is that setback dependent upon any construction of the lean-to? Let's say if it were an awning-type structure projecting out from the side of the building, not attached to the ground in any way, would that still be legal, or does that still have to fall within the 10-foot setback? You understand my...
So the proposed structure is roofed.
Roof, and I presume it's got posts to the ground.
Yes, I don't know that a design was
But
submitted.
if it were
but-
suspended off the side of the building, would that, and it was open underneath, would that maintain the 10-foot setback?
I know that overhangs are permitted within the setback. I don't know that it would be structurally possible, but it might. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know.
Well, the owner could address the structure of the barn.
Any additional questions to the city? Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Bryce? Read yourself into the minutes, please.
I'm Howard Bryce, 228 Lakeside Drive.
Mr. Bryce, you received a copy of the staff reports. Do you wish to embellish the reports or just respond to and from questions from the board?
I respond to questions. Right?
Brett, John?
I'm sorry?
Direct your question to Mr. Bryce.
Yes. Great. I'm sorry, I must apologize. I went on your property. I knocked on your door twice. No one answered. I had to see it, so I walked back to the back of the lot and nosed around. I apologize. But my question is, and that's a darn fine looking shop, but anyway, what kind of structure is underneath that, and could that support a lean-to or an eyebrow coming out 8 foot?
It is a pole building structure. I'm not a engineer by trade. I don't know if it could support the roof that would be built. The plan was to build poles on the corners and a roof structure that would lean off of the back side of the building. The roof structure would match the existing roof, which is a metal shed. There are trusses that are on that side, on that far end, and there are 3 poles that are into the ground on that back side. So I don't know if it would, could be,
Okay.
if that
But
would be
that would
possible.
be open, the backside would be open.
Yeah, yeah. But our plan was to place poles. There would be essentially 3 poles, just like what is on the structure now, on the inside of the building. There'll be poles at each corner and 1 in the center, just to support the roof itself.
When did your neighbor build a similar structure on the other side of the fence?
Before I lived there.
Okay.
Yes. I think there's a pool house that is adjacent to the rear, and then the pool house has a shed off the back as well. There,
Which comes right up to the fence.
yeah.
So that probably is grandfathered in, I would assume.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
To the rear of the property is, the property that's at the rear of us, it does come to a severe point, and the landscaping that is in there is bamboo, and bamboo is prevalent right in that area. We took a lot of time to clear out the bamboo before we built the structure that's there now, but you can't really see through that short section of the property that's back behind us because of the bamboo.
Karen?
Mr. Bryce, why do you want to add on to the building? Is there a specific use that you're seeking?
Yes, I have some yard tools that I would like to have outside of the weather and place underneath a shed. Lawnmower, I have a lawnmower and some other stuff that's in my garage in my home, and some yard tools that I would like to place back there. I also have a utility trailer that's out in the weather that could fit underneath there. It's a 4-foot wide trailer. So I could take that and place it underneath the shed as well.
Okay, thank you.
Now, are you calling that building in the back a shed?
No, the shop, I would,
Shop.
it's a shop.
Okay,
I would add a lean-to shed on the rear. I would call that a shed
okay.
off the back of the shop. Yes. The truss that is there, we can add a 2x8 onto that, and there is a piece of flange metal that would allow us to run the shed off of that. It's already kind of been planned. If this passes, then it's there to be able to be added on. But it would be a shed off the back of the shop. Yes, ma'am.
And it's, your shop there is not big enough to hold this other stuff that you want to put back there?
Oh, shops are never big enough sometimes for what we have planned. There are items that I have inside my shop that I use for my work. I have some cable that I leave in there, and also work on a car. I have a car that I work on that's in there, and then I'll have a workbench. I'm not done setting my shop up yet, but I won't have the room in there for all those yard tools and a mower and some other things that I could leave outside underneath that.
Now, how long has that workshop been there?
2017. It was, I believe, the summer of 2017.
And you initially applied for a variance to have that shop move closer to the property line.
We applied for an administrative waiver originally in the spring of 2017. We originally wanted the shop larger, and I think we actually had on the plans to place that shed on the rear. We had a neighbor that was to the rear that did submit a letter at the time, and we decided, I think it was denied at that time based off of that letter, and we didn't go through with a appeals process. We just decided to leave the shed off of the rear, and we would, approach it at a later date.
Not that you made a wrong decision, but you could have built the shop larger, you just chose not to?
We could have arranged it a little bit differently, but it would have encroached into our yard more and closer to the house. I didn't want it too large, and it is kind of a big shop sitting in the back of the yard. If you see the pictures, I didn't want it to be too big coming into the yard. The lot is sloped from back to front, and whenever you have a shop a building that is more narrow. We looked at making it narrower, but it would have come into the yard more in the front, would have been higher as well. Or we would have had to dig into the ground more at the back. We wanted to try and keep it as level as possible and not, and the elevation not too high.
And do you have the same neighbors behind you still?
Yes.
The ones that have
Yes, ma'am.
objected to it before?
Yes, ma'am.
This lean-to, I'm sorry, I don't want to.
No, I just was kind of,
Good, bud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand you correctly, and if I hear you right, this lean-to portion on the back of the shed was a consideration in the initial design?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. And the reason it wasn't put there is because the building would, in order to meet the setback, the entire building, given the shed, given the lean-to is the critical dimension here for the distance from the back line, you would have to move the building forward, the whole building forward. Is that right?
We did move the building away from we made it smaller, and we moved it away from the fence just a little bit more. It was going to be about 10 feet, I think. We moved it away from the property line an additional maybe 3 feet than what we were originally looking at, just so that we weren't that close, and so that we were outside of the setback.
But the lean-to was a consideration at one time in the design and
Yes, sir.
in the layout and where the shop was going to go.
Yes, sir.
Is there a place, and again, noticing where your shed, where your building, where your shop is, I also noticed a large camper
Yes, sir.
trailer on one side of the building. Would it be reasonable to expect that this lean-to portion could be put on one side of the building or the other and still meet setback requirements?
We couldn't put it on the right side because of our camper that is parked there on the right side. It would have to be a structure that would be at least 13 feet tall, and the building is, it would look very bad if we put the shed on the right side, and it would take away from our camper being parked there. We couldn't park our camper there. The left side, there is an air conditioning unit that's on the left side. So placing it over there, there's not enough space to put. There is some landscaping that's on that side of the building as well, that I guess could be removed, but it wouldn't. We do have a HVAC unit that is on that side as well that kind of takes up most of that space. That wouldn't allow the space to put anything underneath there. We do have a door that's on that side as well. So the width of the building is 30 feet. The depth of it is 24. When you take out the door and the landing for the door, I would say it's probably approximately maybe about 20 feet left, and then the HVAC unit is right in the middle. So there would not be any place to, if we did build a shed off that side, I wouldn't have enough room to really put anything in there because of the HVAC unit. The back side, it really makes the most sense. It's out of the way, nobody can see it. Even the neighbors behind us don't see it because of all the trees and the landscaping that's back there. It's the most unobtrusive location to put it.
Mr. Bryce, this quote lean-to in the back, is it going to have walls on the, it's granted walls on the side and walls in the back, or it's completely open?
Completely open, yes.
So it'd just be like a roof?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, just a roof, that's all it is. When I say a shed, it's going to be a lean-to shed on the roof, and that's it. There are not going to be any walls.
Mr. Chairman. And how tall is that going to be? Would you like for it to be?
The bottom half would probably be about 8 feet. The roof line will come out, and then you want about at least 8 feet to walk under it, from the ground to the top of the roof structure that you can touch. Not the top of the roof, but actually the structure that holds up the roof would be 8 feet. 8 feet up.
Do we have, the board have further questions to Mr. Bryce? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have others to speak to the variance requests? Final call, others to speak to the variance requests? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question of the city?
Yes.
Is this Jim Lake's subdivision, or this particular area of the subdivision, is it subject to CCRs?
I am
Covenants,
not.
restrictions, that type of thing?
Let me check the file and see if that application form has a, if that question is asked on the application form. We may need to bring the applicant back up if that's not an, okay, the applicant indicated on the application form, the question is this property subject to a recorded restricted covenant that would prohibit or restrict the activity proposed in the application? And he indicated no.
No.
Staff has no proof otherwise, nothing to indicate otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
The chair would entertain a motion.
Okay, for the sake of discussion, I'd like to recommend that we accept application number 19-93005 with the following conditions. Approval to allow an approximate 5-foot accessory building setback from the rear property line at 228 Lakeside Drive, TPN 106-17-11-003, to permit a 26-foot by 8-foot addition to an existing 24 by 30 accessory garage, and that the final order is recorded with the Aiken County RMC office.
Do we have a second?
Second.
John, second. It's been properly moved and second that we accept the application. Do we have any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, would now be an appropriate time to follow up with an answer to Mr. Brecht's question?
Yes.
Okay, I consulted the zoning ordinance, and based on section 4.1.1C, projection into yards, it says the following may extend or project into a required yard: cornices, sills, eaves, belt courses, chimneys, or other similar architectural feature. So you may interpret that differently, but I see nothing there that would, it doesn't allow a whole roof, supported roof. And then the other two subsections are unroofed platforms, landings, steps or balconies, and heating and air conditioning units, transformers, or other similar machinery.
Thank you.
What was that,
4.1.3C.
So is it your interpretation then that you could not project off without pole structures? Any projection off the existing roof line still would be subject to the setback?
That would be my interpretation, yes, sir.
Do we have any further discussion?
I'm just reading this part up here that says, in making a decision, if this is denied, I'm asking myself, would this be an unnecessary hardship to the applicant? And I don't see it as an unnecessary, as a hardship to him. And are the conditions described a result of his actions? I mean, he chose not to build that larger to start out with, because he
But he was
didn't want to
denied.
encroach on his property.
Yeah, I would agree that a couple years ago, I think Board Member Coward asked the applicant that, yeah, he kind of had this in mind to begin with, just another 5 feet back, and we wouldn't have an issue with this thing at
Right.
this point.
He didn't want to encroach in his backyard.
So at that point, he built a structure, it is the subject of his own actions, that he's now wants to put something on that's into the easement. It's also curious, in 17, the existing neighbor who's still there had a problem with what he was going to do initially, and apparently we got no response from that neighbor this time.
There were no complaints or concerns received, and that property owner certainly was mailed
Fine, yep.
the contiguous owner notice.
And then there's a bamboo tree screen in the back too, so on the neighbor's property, so,
Yeah, that screen is really thick.
yeah.
But I might add that the applicant took down, cleared a lot out from his lot. He removed a lot of the bamboo, and if you know anything about bamboo, it can spread, and he had to remove a lot of it to put the building in. So what does that say, that the current neighbor or subsequent neighbors, back door neighbors, couldn't do the same thing, and all of a sudden see this big building and this lean-to staring him in the face? Just a thought.
But actually, he's not meeting the criteria of Section 4, as we've just said. This is a result of his own action.
That's correct. That's the way I see it.
I didn't even mention this, but I don't think that there are extraordinary and conditions pertaining to this particular piece of property. And he'll still be able to use his property. This is denied. I'd like him to be able to have this, I just don't see that it's within our guidelines for us to approve this.
Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raise of the right hand. One. Those opposed, same sign. The motion is lost, 6-1. The variance is denied. With that, I'm going to declare a 5-minute break.
Everybody's like.
Okay?
She doesn't do special ed, okay? Look back, that's special education.
I call your attention to application 293006, requesting a variance regarding a building setback to partially reconstruct the building at 1100 Park Avenue Southeast to the city. Has this been properly posted?
Yes, sir.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
Yes, we did receive a letter of support today, and that has been submitted to you for your consideration. And please let the record, the minutes note that this is submitted as Exhibit D in their packets.
Thank you. You have a presentation?
The applicant is requesting a variance to reconstruct the entire eastern portion of the structure containing the bowling alley lanes. So the specific request is for a 0-foot setback, no setback along Orangeburg Street. That's their front yard, and a 0-foot setback along the eastern property line, their side yard, where setbacks of 30 feet and 20 feet would normally be required in this zoning district. So this property was, or this building was constructed in 1966, which was 34 years prior to the adoption of the current zoning ordinance. In spring of 2013, the roof over the south set of lanes collapsed, and so our zoning ordinance, section 8.1.5, says that if a non-residential building or structure, including any accessory structures, is damaged, and if such damage is greater than 50% of its replacement valuation, as determined by the building official, such building or structure may only be reconstructed to conform with the provisions regulating the placement of buildings and structures in the district in which it is situated. There's also an administrative interpretation that was issued in 2008 that declares that such alterations include, but are not limited to, removal and replacement of more than 50% of the structural members of the roof, such as trusses, or removal and replacement of more than 50% of the structural members of the walls, such as studs, within a 1-year period. To give you some context about how this building is laid out, there's a front which faces Orangeburg Street, and that houses the primary entrance, cashier stand, pro shop, concessions, restrooms and offices, and then the rear portion is the area in question that houses the lanes. And this is a split lane configuration with lanes to the south and north. The roof collapsed over just the south portion, south set of lanes, but the building official noted that the entire roof needed to be replaced. So the roof over the north portion, which is not collapsed, also was had been compromised. And so the property owners are now proposing to reconstruct on the original footprint, which violates the setbacks, obviously. And our code, as I read, would only allow them to demolish and rebuild the compromised south lanes. I think that sums it up.
I have a question for the city.
Brandon, go ahead.
So the interpretation is that the entire roof portion just over the lanes would have to be replaced at this point, correct?
That is the opinion of the building official.
Okay. The structural elements, walls, all that kind of stuff, still good? Because, I mean, just replacing the roof would constitute over 50% of the entire structure?
of the, if you go back to that, that interpretation, 50% of the structural members of the roof, such as trusses or removal and replacement of wood. So it would impact 50% of the roof.
Okay.
And the staff report, I'm not familiar with if there were more that the building official shared concerns about, I'm not aware of that. The staff report just notes his concern about the roof, entire roof over the lanes needing to be replaced. There's no mention of walls.
I guess that was, Mr. Chairman, is that okay to speak? If I ask?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was kind of wondering, like he was, they're not proposing, or they are proposing to rebuild the walls? No.
They're proposing, it is my understanding, and they'll have the opportunity to clarify, but it's my understanding that they're proposing to demolish that entire portion, that entire wing, south and north lanes, and install a metal building in its stead. So that would be replacing the roof and the walls.
Okay.
I guess I don't understand the zero setback on the Orangeburg. When there's a parking lot in front of the building and a vacant lot, and you say zero setback from the building, I don't understand that.
I think if you look at this aerial, a zero setback might not apply to the whole lot, but there's at least that portion.
That portion of the office, okay,
Yeah.
got you. Other questions from the board to the city? John?
And this is kind of a hypothetical situation, but I'm just curious. I assume he's going to rebuild and put a bowling alley there. And I'm not suggesting Mr. Zielinski would even consider doing this, but let's say they tore it down, rebuilt the structure for a different use. Would that be, after we granted this variance, would that be okay as long as it's in the light industrial zone?
That would, let me look at your conditions.
You know, if we say, okay, you can have the zero setback to do what you want to do, and then things change and it becomes something else with a zero setback. And would that be okay if it was still light industrial application?
So if a rezoning request were ever submitted, that would be a consideration of that rezoning request. You know, each zoning district has its own set of setback and land development requirements. And so the Planning Commission in reviewing, and ultimately City Council in reviewing the rezoning request would see whether or not the structure complied with the setback requirements for that zoning classification. And that would be a factor in their decision to allow the rezoning or not.
Okay,
Does that-
I understand the zero setbacks for the bowling alleys, but let's just say it gets changed and he makes a bigger building where maybe it didn't have to be a zero setback. Would that be okay if, as long as that application were light industrial?
No, because this request is for a bowling alley. If he does not build a bowling alley, he has to go back through the process.
Okay.
It would apply, to clarify, I think I understand your question, as long as, yes, for other uses zoned light industrial, which is the current zoning, then yes, this would still carry with the property. So
Okay.
as long as that use is allowed for light industrial, then it'd be fine.
So next year, if something should happen and he has to put this property up for sale, as long as what the people that bought it applied for the right, business or whatever, light industrial.
As long as that use were allowed,
Because the structure's there.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I read it, Mr. Chair, if we're in the city, if I'm reading everything, and it's probably pretty straightforward, he intends to reconstruct on the same footprint, length, width, height,
Yes.
so forth.
That is what has been proposed, correct. Oh, sorry, let me clarify. Footprint, so ground dimensions, length and width. I'm not sure that height is specified, but there is a maximum building height for the light industrial district that he would need to comply with,
Okay.
because he has not asked for a variance from that.
I guess it would be a question then to the applicant if he was gonna
Correct.
deviate or go higher than what
Let's see
is allowed.
if that information was given in the staff report. I don't believe it's mentioned. No. I don't know the height. No, sir.
But currently, this building is not from what I could see and what I remember from back in 1966 coming forward, this is a single-story building. As a bowling alley, it's a single-story building. It's going to be built back as a bowling alley. There's no reason for us to believe that it would be a multi-story building and exceed whatever height requirements there are in this light industrial district.
Right, and there are a couple of safety nets to ensure that all of those development standards are met. When the building permit is submitted, the planning department reviews the proposed structure and makes sure that it complies with any of our maximum building heights. We verify again that setbacks will be met. And then it's also located in an overlay district, a design overlay district, so the building design, as long as they meet the minimum spending threshold, which it sounds like that will very likely be the case, would require, the proposal would require a certificate of appropriateness. So that's looking at the design side of things.
Are there any further questions from the board to the city? Thank you. Mr. Zielinski?
It's Daniel Zielinski, 1100 Park Avenue Southeast.
Thank you.
And I'll try to answer any questions you got. I actually are going to rebuild in the exact footprint. The height is going to be tall enough to tie into the existing building. So it won't be a skyscraper or anything. It'll be a regular,
Bowling alley.
it'll be a bowling alley. I've been there since 1971.
And you
Well, I've
are
been around-
you're gonna replace the bowling alley?
Correct, yes, sir. I already have the equipment in the warehouse waiting. The reason it's taking so long, the roof fell in 2013, is insurance settlement took 28 months. Funding was a big part of it, and then getting through this process here with the building, and I have a building representative here too, construction company, if we have any questions for him. So it is going to be a bowling center, correct?
Go ahead, John.
The east property line, I was looking at it, and there seems to be maybe 6 feet between the wall and some vegetation.
Correct.
But the property line is along the wall, which is even with the sign, right?
Correct, yes, sir.
So that's this exact same footprint?
Exact same
Okay.
footprint. The building is 50, if I'm mistaken, 220 by 50, 50 wide, 220 long.
Okay.
And some of my diagrams do show the dimensions on the building itself.
So the space
There-
that, the space that runs down between the east side of the building is on the other people's property then?
Well, it's actually on the line, I believe.
Okay.
Correct. So
Right.
I think we're asking the variance for, to be built where it's
Right,
at.
okay.
Being that property is unique, it's long and thin, and the bowling alley, it wasn't really a bowling alley to begin with. I don't know if everybody knows the true story. The date is wrong. It's 66. It was built way before then, probably early 60s or maybe 59, because it was a bowling alley in 60 and 61. Then it closed, and then my parents reopened it back up in 71 as a bowling center. So it was a bowling alley back in the early 60s. So I don't know what, probably that's as far as they can go back in the county as far as they can go back to 66, I'm not sure.
Now, the original building is cinder block, and you're going to replace it with a metal building?
Correct, it's going to be a metal building with metal roofing, correct. The walls will come down because they were damaged as the roof collapsed.
Oh,
I opened up I get in there every morning about 7, I got there that morning and the roof was sitting in the floor. So it was, first thing we called was, insurance company, engineering, and then we shut it down. For the city request, we shut the building and locked the doors. I'm the only one that goes in there right now at the moment.
go ahead, Fred.
Sir, I want to commend you for what you've been through to get to this point.
Thank you. It's been a long road, sorry.
Yes,
It's been a
sir.
long road, 6.5 years.
Yes, sir. I see that in the correspondence. I commend you for sticking with it.
Well, it's in my blood. I mean, my parents owned it in 71, and I stuck with it all these years.
Well, sir, I can remember in the early 60s when that was a bowling alley. I'm not professing my age here, but I can remember.
You do
growing-
remember it's early 60s then?
I
Correct.
remember 3 bowling alleys in town, and one was on the west side of town, yours, Park Avenue Lanes, and then there was the
Aiken
old
Bowl.
Aiken Bowl.
Aiken
Now
Bowl.
you're the only,
Correct.
there are no bowling alleys technically in town now. You'll be
Correct.
the only
Yes,
one
sir. Correct.
to provide
Entertainment for the kids, the young people,
this
and
activity,
churches, right?
this
And we had a
activity and
great
so
business.
forth.
Just want it back. I've been fortunate to have a job to keep me going while this is being processed through.
But with the 0 setback requirement and trying to be, and building on the same footprint, otherwise in today's standards, in today's setback requirements, that piece of property, you could only build a long, narrow, if everything was cleaned off and so the only thing you could build now is a long, very narrow building
Right, correct.
to meet the setbacks that's required of the code or required of the zoning ordinance.
If you've been in there, you couldn't make anything else. I mean, you could put a skating rink on both sides, because it is in the 60s. AMF was contracted to come in, they poured a bunch of concrete so the lanes could go in there. So it was built for, well, it actually set up for a bowling center in the 60s, right? It wasn't built for a bowling center, but it was set up for a bowling center. I did a little research.
One quick question for the applicant.
Brandon?
The adjacent lot behind where the lanes are that shows it's heavily wooded,
Yes, sir.
that's the boat repair thing?
Correct, yes.
That's all their wooded area there as well?
Yes, sir.
Have they indicated any plans for usage of that to you or anybody else? I know we didn't get
Well, I
any.
think he's here. Mr. Timmerman's here.
Okay,
Right, and he'll probably talk too, so.
okay. I'll say the
Like I say, our
question.
lot actually goes down to the telephone pole behind Family Dollar.
Okay.
So that's where if somebody asks about parking, that's where all of our parking is on that side there.
Okay. I'll save my question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious about the staff response under item 3. It indicates that the setback requirements in a light industrial does not permit a long-standing bowling alley to be rebuilt.
Right, so I think the message there is that even though this has been a long-standing business, the building was a legal non-conforming structure. And even though another city department has validated the need to rebuild that entire portion,
It would
it's
still be a legal non,
by the letter of our law, it couldn't be rebuilt unless you all
Okay.
grant that
I understand now.
permission.
Other questions to Mr. Zielinski? Thank you. Do we have others to speak to the variance request? Final call, others to speak to the variance request?
Is the owner of the adjacent property here?
Oh. Please read yourself into the minutes, please.
My name is Jane Timmerman.
Address?
My home address,
Either.
845 Brandy Road.
Thank you. Question?
So, Mr. Stemmer, good to see you.
Nice to see you also.
So this is your boat repair?
My husband leases the property from me.
Okay. So
I actually own the wooded lot and where the boat repair is.
they own it or you own it?
I own it.
Okay. All right, so you're here in support of the replacement?
We are. I don't see anything different that he wants to add, or with the land. He wants to put it back exactly the way it was.
Right.
And we don't have a problem with that.
Well, it's just important for the board to hear that, because when you look at zero setbacks and adjacent property owners, I like to try to give everybody their say, so.
At some point, we may do something. We may come and want to clear the property and do something with it, but as of right now, I haven't made a decision.
Thank you.
But it would be nice to see it to go back, because this area needs some form of entertainment for our children in that area too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any others to speak to the zoning request, the variance request? Seeing, hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
I'd like to make a motion
Nancy? I recognize.
that application 20-93006. Wait a minute. Be approved. And this would be to allow construction on the exact footprint. And it can't exceed that footprint. And the final order be recorded at the RMC office. Did I leave anything out?
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Recognize Judy first. Judy second. It's been properly moved and second that we approve the variance request. Do we have any discussion? Nancy?
When I first read all this, I thought he was gonna leave all the walls up there, but then, hearing, even though it's gonna be a different structure, I see that all the criteria are met. If this isn't allowed to be done, it would definitely prohibit his use of this property. He couldn't help it that the roof fell in. It wasn't anything that he did. And I just think that this should be approved.
Mr. Chair, I would also say I agree with my colleague Nancy, and I feel that all the 6 criteria for granting a variance are met. As I said before, and I'll say it again, I commend the family for hanging in there and wanting to reconstruct the facility. I think it will certainly add to the area and provide some great entertainment for young people, and certainly improve the overall area. And I think it's a good thing, sir.
I want to add to your comment, be entertainment for older people too. Any further discussions?
No, but I was happy to know that that was going to be my question, was about the neighbors. And it was,
Yeah,
they're here, they're in support of it, and
that's good.
it would definitely not be a detriment to the adjacent neighbors, as they have stated. And my children learned to bowl there back in the 70s.
Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raising the right hand. Let it be shown that the vote is unanimous. The variance is approved. I am going to use the chair prerogative, and the next two items we are going to hear as one. And that's application 20-92002 and application 20-92003. We're going to hear those together. However, at the end, I will solicit a separate motion for each one, but we'll hear them as one item, since they're primarily the same requests from Verizon for a special exception for the new utility pole and a small cell telecommunications antenna. And one will be at the northwest corner of Whiskey Road and Pine Log Road. And the second one will be at the northwest corner of South Aiken Lane and Corporate Parkway. To the city, have these been properly posted?
Yes, sir.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
None received.
Thank you. Presentation.
The applicant, as you stated, has requested a special exception to allow a telecommunications facility on public right-of-way. In the case of the former, the most adjacent property is zoned general business and is developed with a bank. In the case of the latter, the immediate adjacent property is zoned residential single-family RS10, which is owned by the Aiken County School District and part of the South Aiken High School campus. The property is also adjacent to unincorporated property owned by the Army Reserves and across the street from a commercial center zoned planned commercial. So jump back for the Whiskey Road and Pine Log Road installation. Section 3.3.24.A.1 states, and this actually applies to both, location in office, general business, and planned commercial districts. A telecommunications facility, tower, or antenna may be approved by special exception in accordance with the provisions of 6.2.18 when located in the general business or planned commercial districts. An application meeting the requirements set forth in 6.2.5 shall be required, along with demonstration that the conditions in paragraph B below are met. So staff has made the determination that the proposed structures, in one case a 38-foot tall wooden utility pole equipped with a small cell installation, and in the other that's a 31-foot tall equipment pole, utility pole, meet the definition of a telecommunications facility in function and are therefore subject to that aforementioned section of the zoning ordinance, which requires a special exception. So you have considered 3 prior similar cases for the request for small cell telecommunications technology, and These are markedly smaller than your typical telecommunications tower. So it is permissible that they, or feasible that they could be located in right-of-way. This applicant does have a franchise agreement allowing them to use the right-of-way to install small cell infrastructure. And they are permitted to install the same technology on SCDOT rights-of-way. So they have arranged with the city and with the state.
Thank you. And I'm sure the board will remember one of the last ones that we reviewed was on Richland Avenue by the Walmart drugstore. Do we have any questions to the city? Thank you. Mr. Hendrick, representative,
For both of them.
both, would you want to read yourself into the minutes, please?
Good evening all. My name is Matthew Hartley. I'm with Verizon Wireless.
What was your last name?
Hartley, Hartley.
Thank you.
And my address is 3775 River Hollow Run, Peachtree Corners, Georgia.
Thank you.
Across the river. I'm with Verizon, so the applicant name that was on there, Lori Hendricks, that is our real estate specialist that is handling the specific sites that we've got. And then I've also got Brad, who is with Essentia, who is the site company that is with us, that is handling all of our permit submissions and everything like that. So any questions y'all have, I'll be more than happy to answer.
One technical question, what's NEMA?
Oh, NEMA. So that is a rating. So that's just so you've got, basically it's a NEMA 1 through 4, and what that essentially equates to is an outdoor rating for boxes. So 1 is pretty much weather and everything is going to immediately get inside of it, whereas like a NEMA 4 rating is, it's waterproof, it is built, designed to go outside. So.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, on your 38-foot tall pole,
Yes,
at the very top is the antenna.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, on Pine Log, where there must be 50-foot tall poles there, it crosses over from one side, from the south side to the north side.
Yes, sir.
Does the antenna prevent you from mounting the satellite on an existing pole, or do you have to put up your own pole?
So this particular case, we do have to put up our own pole. So no, normally our main goal is to really look to attach to existing infrastructure that's in place. So whether that would be traffic lights, that would be street lights, or existing utility poles. And that's why we have agreements in place with everyone. Essentially, we try to be able to attach that. In this particular instance, that is a primary pole line. So that is high voltage power. So we are not able to, with our agreements that we have, to be able to attach, because our antennas do go on top of the pole. Now, secondary poles, if there was a secondary pole in the area, then we could use that to attach the antennas to. So in this particular case, we just don't have the option really to attach to anything else that's in the adjacent area.
I just saw the pole as being high enough. And
Yeah, it would be great, but there's a whole lot of stuff that my wife tells me is extremely boring as to why we can't get into doing that kind of thing. But yes, sir, if we could, we absolutely would, but unfortunately with the primary power poles, we are unable to attach to those.
Thank you. Further question from the board to Mr. Hartley?
I have 2 questions.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I'm just curious, what is this going to do that you can't already do? And why so close to one another?
So what we've got, so with the way that our small cells are designed, which these are going in to kind of really enhance our current LTE, 4G LTE network. So the reason that we look to put small cells in is we're running into one of 2 problems. We're either having a capacity issue, which means you look at your phone, you've got full service, but everybody's got full service and nobody's getting a phone call out. That just means there's too many users on the existing, trying to get to that existing macro or the larger traditional cell tower that you see. Or it could be used sometimes as a coverage objective. So if we've got an area that is not being covered adequately by the existing towers that are there, we'll use the small cells to supplement that coverage. So it's going to be either a capacity. So this is kind of a mix of both. So the, where we're at going on the, next to the Army Reserve and then with the high school, that is kind of a coverage area. We're not really hitting that from a coverage perspective. The one that we're going is closer to the Wells Fargo, Kroger Shopping Center and Home Depot. That is more on the capacity side. We're just seeing too many users in that area that we cannot hit right now with the current cell towers that we have in the area. Did I get both of those questions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
First.
Yeah, was it Verizon we approved at the corner of the Baptist Church there, Millbrook Baptist, and South Aiken Lane or something? Isn't there one there?
Yes, ma'am. So those would be, I believe those were Crown Castle small cells, but they are our radios. So that was when we were contracted with Crown Castle in the past to do a turnkey service. So basically we provided the radios, they did the location, mounting, brackets, all that kind of stuff. So we're moving to a self-perform to bring that back in-house on our side.
Thank you.
Brandon, did you have a question?
Yeah, just as a matter of formality, just to read into the record, no known health, environmental issues with these small relay stations, especially at 30 feet in front of a bank, walking traffic, repeated exposure, no known issue?
That's correct. And we've got a fairly extensive, comprehensive compliance program that we have to follow that keeps us within all the FCC regulated rates and everything like that. And really, not being an RF engineer myself to speak to this, but really your maximum of exposure, which is still falls underneath that limit, is much closer to the antenna. So you're still looking, if we're 38 feet up, you're still 25 feet, 30, even 30 high, higher than that before you really even hit those levels that are what would be considered the occupational exposure limit. So that is people who are trained to be around RF emissions, which is still way underneath the FCC limits. But I do have more information on that. If y'all would like to see that, I can send that over to y'all as well, just kind of studies and all that kind of good stuff.
I think all that should be submitted for the record anyway.
We can get it in.
Yeah. No more questions.
Are these smaller towers going to be a trend, a future trend, do you think? Will there be more of these requests coming along?
So as far as the request to install new poles, just kind of depends on the areas that they're going in. So right now we only have the two that we're looking at for Aiken. So Aiken, we've gone into Aiken, North Augusta. We're in Augusta. We get closer over to like Columbia County on the Georgia side. So these have come across the river. Sorry to hit the microphone there. But these have come across the river. So that is a possibility that they could be coming down. Right now, what we're looking at, I'd say for, at least the next year is really just these two that we've got.
Sir, you mentioned 4G. Would this, I know nothing about all that, so I just think 5G is a bigger superhighway than 4G.
Yes, sir.
Is this going to kind of blend or work into the 5G service that we might see someday?
So 4G and 5G, just as kind of a quick down and dirty on this, is 4G and 5G are two completely separate technology layers. So when we went from 3G to 4G, as we were building out 4G network across the country, we still had our 3G network that was pretty much taking the bulk of the traffic until that 4G network could be built to the level that it is now. So just as we start to build 5G out, we will still have a need for the 4G network. And then basically when you're in a 5G network and areas that we're building 5G start kind of in a concentric area and they build out from that. So as you're in a 5G area, you will be on 5G service. When you leave that 5G area, you will then immediately roll back to a 4G LTE network. Ultimately, the goal is to have coverage, the maps that we have for our 4G coverage right now to look the same for 5G, but that's going to take time because, like I said, it's a entirely new layer of technology. It's new equipment, so it's not just a software upgrade.
Would that necessarily be, though, more poles of this nature? I mean, does that translate into more of these poles or more locations?
So it may not necessarily translate into more of the new pole requests coming in, because again, as you get into areas that you do have the ability to attach to the existing infrastructure, you will see more small cells coming in. The way that the towers work, small cells are really kind of a supplement to the existing towers. Those will never go away, but really with the way that land is being developed and populations are growing, things like that, you're kind of running out of the areas to build the towers. So you're kind of limited to your existing. You do still have some, new greenfield areas that you can put towers in, but then it comes down to a lot of rooftops, building tops, things like that. But if you don't have the tall buildings to essentially serve as a tower, then the small cells are what make up that difference in that. So yes, I would say small cells are something that is you will see more of. And then again, it's just kind of a mix of, what the infrastructure is in place that can be attached to for that, so.
Mr. Chairman, to further expand on that, what is the policy? So when you're moving from the 3G to the 4G and you're just in that specific example and the technology changes or gets larger, smaller, different, for example, if it was time to then expand again or move, does that pole remain and then you find another location, so there's sort of the clutter left behind as you move, or is there a policy to remove that and then put it somewhere else so that we don't have a collection of lost poles?
Stuff that's just sitting out.
Right.
So we do. So any pole that we put in, just to that point, so any pole that we put in, if we do remove that equipment, then we will remove that pole as well, because we won't have a need for that pole. So we won't just leave, so we won't abandon equipment and we won't leave the poles that we have installed out there. As far as as far as being able to say if we have a 4G site, will it be replaced with a 5G site? Or will it be 5G only, 4G goes away? I really can't speak to that, just because that's our traffic folks and our RF folks that kind of make those decisions on what stays and what goes. We have seen, I know in some of the markets where we have deployed 5G across the United States, we have started seeing combo sites of 4G and 5G going into the same one. So that's a possibility. I haven't seen any yet that we have completely decommed a 4G small cell and replaced it with a 5G, because again, we still need that 4G network. So the 4G network will be in place for several more years.
Right.
That we've got, so.
Are there additional questions for Mr. Hartley? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Do we have other to speak to the special exception? Final call. Hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion, two motions, so that we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I
Judy?
would like to accept application 29202 with the following conditions. Approval is granted to have an approximately 38-foot tall small cell telecommunications facility within the right-of-way, generally located at the northeast corner of Whiskey Road and Pine Log Road. The telecommunications facility must comply with the standards of section 3.3.24 of the zoning ordinance, with the exception of setback, screening, and fencing conditions listed therein at section 3.3.24.B.4.B, section 3.324.B5, and section 3.3.24.B.6. Electrical service should be underground pursuant to section 4.24 of the zoning ordinance. The final order is to run with the land and be recorded at Aiken County RMC office. Now, would you like to consider both of them at the same time?
No.
Okay.
One separate motion. Do we have a second for that motion?
A second.
Karen seconded. It's been properly moved and second that we accept the stated special exception request. Do we have any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Nancy?
I'm a little bit confused. I just want to make sure that this is right. The northeast corner of Whiskey Road, I thought that was the gas station and not the
No.
bank.
This is northwest.
Northwest.
It says northeast. And that's what Ms. Turner said.
Okay, but the original thing says northwest.
What original thing?
Yeah, it does. The application up here has northwest. And this, it does, that's a typographical error.
It does say northeast, it should be northwest.
Okay, so when you read in your conditions, you should have said northwest.
That is true.
Correct.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure.
I didn't catch that, I'm sorry.
Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion, corrected motion, show by raising the right hand. Let the record show that it was approved unanimously. The chair would now entertain a motion for the second location.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Judy.
like to request that we approve application 20-92003 with the following conditions. Approval is granted to have an approximately 31-foot tall, small cell telecommunications facility within the right-of-way, generally located at the northeast corner of South Aiken. Make sure that is correct.
No, that's not.
That's
No.
southwest too.
Northwest.
I mean northwest, okay? Corner of South Aiken Lane and Corporate Parkway. The telecommunications facility must comply with the standards of section 3.3.24 of the zoning ordinance with the exception of setback, screening, and fencing conditions listed therein at section 3.3.24.B.4.B, section 3.3.24.B.5, and section 3.3.24.B.6. Electrical service shall be underground pursuant to section 4.24 of the zoning ordinance. The final order is to run with the land and be recorded with the Aiken County RMC office.
Second.
Bud seconded. It's been properly moved and second that we accept applications 29-2003. Do we have any discussion?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman,
Nancy?
Did you want to go first?
I'll go second.
Okay, I know it's on the west, okay? But is it on the Armory or is it on that shopping center side? Because the Armory side would be the northwest, and the shopping center would be the southwest, and I thought he said it was for the shopping center, but maybe I'm confused.
It's next to the armory.
Next to the armory, right?
Yeah,
Is it going to be on the Armory
the armory.
side property?
Yeah, the armory side.
Okay, then it's right.
If you'll look
But
at your
it-
screen,
But is it not on property owned by the school district, owned by South Aiken High School?
it's on right-of-way.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may. It's on right-of-way, so it's not owned by any of those mentioned entities. It's owned by the owner of the road, so it's public land. But we reference those adjacent properties because we use the nearby zoning.
Okay, so
that
it's
they
going to
have.
be north,
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah.
west. Okay. Just wanted to make sure we had our directions correct.
Do we have any further discussion?
It is northeast. Oh, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
sorry. I was trying to figure out the directions on the last one, and I neglected to mention this, but for your consideration, in these conditions, condition 3, electrical service shall be underground pursuant to that section of the zoning ordinance.
Right.
You do have the option to grant a waiver and allow above-ground electrical hookup. If you'll notice in your packet, you have two options presented on this diagram. One indicates above-ground service, the other buried electrical service.
The above ground is already there, in place, right?
Nothing is there now.
Well, it's not only a few feet away, is the electrical pole lines
Oh,
on Corporate Parkway.
okay, that I do not know.
Yes. on the north side of Corporate Parkway, electrical lines closer to the street.
They may be connecting to that, but I think on the unit itself, the option is, if you'll notice, in the left diagram, there's this contraption sticking off the middle of the pole. That's above ground. That could be, that would be an option. Otherwise, it will look like
Yeah.
the option to the right.
They would have the option, okay.
Sorry, I have that shown on the screen, but in your packet. It is under Exhibit B. If you'll flip to the second page, it's on the back of the second page.
Okay.
You're trying to say?
If I'm understanding that correctly. I may be misunderstanding that. I know the planning director noted that you can grant a waiver as a part of that condition, saying that they don't have to comply with section 4.2.4 of the zoning ordinance.
Which says that it has to be underground?
Electric service shall be underground.
It should be underground.
And why would we not want to have it underground?
I don't know, I just had a note from him that there were two options presented, and you could grant a waiver to allow above-ground electrical
But what
hookup.
we are proposing is that it would be below ground, correct?
Currently, what you approved for the first location was compliant with that
Right.
varied requirement. To add confusion.
I guess as part of the motion, it states that we are not giving an option for above ground. It's stated in the motion underground.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am assuming that's the intent of the board with the motion.
Correct.
My intent.
Okay,
Yeah.
my intent. Well, do we have any further discussion? Those in favor of the motion show by raising the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. And that is the last item on the agenda. The chair would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Judy that we stand adjourned.
Mr. Verizon?